You've just climbed into bed. Right then, your obnoxious neighbor decides to crank up his blasted speakers to full volume. The bass pounds against the walls, slips through the cracks in the door, and blasts straight into your ears. Annoyed, you grab your phone and call 911. Less than 5 minutes later, the music cuts out. The silence returns, and everything is peaceful once again. You pull the blanket up, smile in satisfaction, and get ready to drift off to sleep. But then, a thought suddenly crosses your mind. Thousands of years ago, before laws even existed, what was life like? No police, no courts, no institutions to settle disputes. When that was the reality, who made sure justice was served? And more importantly, what happened to those who did wrong? First, let's start with how many people imagine prehistoric society. A wild world where muscular ape men charged at one another with stone axes, fighting over scraps of meat. The strong took everything. The weak became prey. No laws meant total chaos. But think about that for a moment. If our ancestors had truly behaved like bloodthirsty beasts with no restraint, humanity would have wiped itself out back in the Paleolithic age. We never would have progressed far enough to make sophisticated tools, let alone survive long enough to invent laws. The reality is quite different. Archaeologists have uncovered human skeletons dating back more than 30,000 years that show evidence of severe injuries, broken legs, broken arms, and other conditions that would have left a person unable to work or fend for themselves for extended periods. Yet remarkably, those injuries had fully healed before the individuals died. What does that tell us? In a hunter-gatherer world, a broken leg was practically a death sentence. You couldn't gather food, you couldn't find water, and you certainly couldn't outrun predators. The fact that these people survived and recovered proves that someone was sharing food with them, caring for them, and protecting them throughout their recovery. In other words, prehistoric communities already had social norms and systems of cooperation strong enough to support their most vulnerable members. So, somehow, these people, with no laws, no prisons, and not even a written language, managed to maintain an astonishingly stable social order. In fact, some anthropological studies suggest something even more surprising. The level of internal violence within certain prehistoric tribes may have been lower than the crime rates seen in some modern cities today. So where was the secret? To unravel this mystery, we need to start with a classic concept in anthropology: Dunbar's number, named after the scientist Robin Dunbar. By studying the brain sizes of primates, Dunbar discovered that the human brain has enough cognitive capacity to maintain stable social relationships with only about 150 people. And guess what? The vast majority of prehistoric tribes were smaller than that number. At a scale where everyone practically knew each other's entire family history, written laws became something of an unnecessary luxury. Because our ancestors possessed an ultimate weapon, a human-powered surveillance system that we still use every day: gossip and reputation. Imagine you have a prehistoric neighbor. Let's call him Grog. One night, Grog returns late from a hunt and secretly hides away a wild boar leg instead of sharing it with the tribe. Grog thinks he's gotten away with it. Not a chance. The next morning, 3 aunties sitting at the mouth of the cave stripping bark are already whispering about the smell of roasted meat coming from Grog's fire. By the afternoon, the entire tribe knows he's selfish. And what happens next? Grog's social credit score starts sinking deep into the negative. When the tribe goes hunting, nobody watches his back. When he falls sick, nobody bothers to care for him. In those communities, gossip and social exclusion weren't just harmless entertainment, they were a form of psychological pressure powerful enough to crush a person from the inside out. But what if Grog is the kind of thick-skinned troublemaker who doesn't care about being shunned and keeps causing problems? That's when ancient societies peeled back the next layer of the onion and activated harsher punishments. The first layer, a sentence worse than death. Prehistoric societies had no prisons to feed and house criminals. So the ultimate punishment for someone beyond redemption was simple: exile. Your weapons were taken away, your name was erased from the tribe, and you were driven out of the territory. Alone in the brutal conditions of the Ice Age, you would have to face darkness, blizzards, and packs of saber-toothed predators on your own. Exile was essentially a death sentence disguised as a humane punishment. The tribe didn't have to kill you. Nature would deliver justice on its behalf. The second layer, when tribes grew larger and the rise of the invisible sheriff. Things became more complicated as populations expanded. The number of people grew beyond Dunbar's limit of roughly 150. Small tribes merged into alliances numbering in the thousands. Now, Grog could cause trouble on one side of the river and simply disappear to the other side, where nobody knew who he was and no one had any reason to gossip about him. To solve this problem, humanity created an even stronger form of social control: taboos and gods. Without police patrols, people turned spiritual fear into invisible surveillance cameras inside the human mind. Steal, and the god of thunder will punish you. Betray your people, and the spirits of your ancestors will curse you to death. Fear of supernatural forces encouraged people to behave properly even when they were completely alone in the wilderness. And even today, despite science having explained lightning and countless natural phenomena, this way of thinking has not disappeared. Many major religions still possess a moral influence that can, at times, be more powerful and deeply rooted than formal law itself. After all, the law can only intervene once a wrongdoing has already occurred and evidence exists. Religious belief, karma, and spiritual doctrine work differently. They intervene at the level of thought, encouraging people to do good without expecting anything in return. The third layer, a terrifyingly fair form of justice between tribes. But what happened when conflict broke out between two different tribes whose gods were not the same? At that point, order was maintained through a rule so ancient and uncompromising that it still sends chills down the spine. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If a member of Tribe A killed someone from Tribe B, then Tribe B had both the right and the obligation to hunt down the killer, or in some cases, any member of Tribe A to avenge the death. The fear of a blood feud spiraling across generations, from fathers to sons and beyond, forced tribes to develop systems of restraint, negotiation, and compromise. Now, let's go back to that neighbor blasting his karaoke speaker from the beginning of the video. Have you noticed something? In a prehistoric community, behavior that constantly disrupted everyone around you would have been very hard to tolerate. The only reason he gets away with it is because he was lucky enough to be born in the modern world. You spend 5 minutes calling the police. He gets a warning or maybe a fine. But just think about it. What if he took that same attitude back to prehistoric times and started pounding on an animal hide drum in the middle of the cave at midnight when everyone was trying to get some sleep before tomorrow's hunt? There's a good chance the Council of Elders would have called an emergency meeting and kicked him out of the cave into the freezing night long ago. And if you zoom out a little, you'll notice that social media today actually operates a lot like those ancient tribes of 150 people. Public callouts, boycotts, deplatforming, and what we now call cancel culture, aren't they simply the 21st century version of Stone Age gossip and exile? We've built a civilized world governed by laws and institutions, yet deep down, we've never completely escaped those ancient social instincts. Looking back across humanity's journey over tens of thousands of years, we arrive at an important realization. Laws were not created to produce kindness. They emerged to replace the social bonds that began to fray as societies grew too large. We built grand courthouses and filled countless pages with legal codes. But in the end, all of it serves one purpose: to recreate the sense of security our ancestors once felt gathered around the tribe's campfire. So tonight, as you enjoy a peaceful night's sleep thanks to laws that protect public order and quiet, remember this. Long before there were police officers in courtrooms, the force that sustained humanity was our instinct to cooperate and survive together. If tomorrow every law and every police officer suddenly vanished for 24 hours, what do you think would happen? Would the world immediately descend into a chaotic horror movie? Or would people find a way to treat one another with decency, just as our ancestors did for thousands upon thousands of years? Let me know what you think in the comments below.